house, there are no accidents.
The air in Dominic Vance's study was thick with the scent of old leather and expensive bourbon, a stark contrast to the sterile, metallic tang of the surveillance equipment hidden in Riley's clutch. Every second felt like a jagged blade against her throat. She had navigated the gala with the grace of a debutante, but here, in the sanctuary of the predator, the mask was slipping. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, not out of fear, she told herself, but adrenaline. She reached for the encrypted drive nestled behind a row of first edition classics, her fingers grazing the cold metal. It was supposed to be the perfect extraction. But then, the world tilted. A stray wire from her earpiece caught on the sharp edge of a bronze bookend, and the device hit the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. Riley froze. She didn't reach for her weapon. She reached for the shattered plastic, her knees hitting the floor in a desperate, instinctive scramble. The cold blue light of the security monitors overhead washed over her, highlighting the tremor in her hands. The heavy oak door didn't creak. It simply yielded. Dominic Vance stood in the threshold, his silhouette carving a hole in the warm, amber light of the hallway. He didn't rush in with a weapon drawn. He didn't call for his guards. He simply stood there, watching her with a terrifying, calculated stillness. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until it felt like the very walls were closing in. "I expected a lot of things tonight, Riley," Dominic said, his voice a low, melodic rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. A spilled drink, perhaps, a bored assistant looking for a quiet place to hide, but a Secret Service comms unit. He stepped into the room, his shadow stretching across the floor until it swallowed her whole. Riley looked up, her breath hitching. In the dim light, his eyes weren't filled with the rage she had been trained to handle. They were filled with something far more dangerous, curiosity. "You've been very thorough," he murmured, stopping just inches from her kneeling form. "But in my house, Riley, there are no accidents, only choices." He tilted his head, his gaze sweeping over her, not as a lover but as a judge. "So, tell me, was the mistake yours, or did your agency send you here to die?" The click of the door locking behind him was the final punctuation mark on her old life. The hunter had been caught, and for the first time in her career, Riley Maddox realized she had no exit strategy. The silence following the crash of the earpiece felt heavier than the threat of a loaded gun. Riley stayed on her knees, her breath hitching as the jagged plastic bit into her palm, a physical reminder of the precision she had just lost. Dominic Vance didn't move. He stood framed by the doorway, a predator who didn't need to snarl to show his teeth. The amber light from the hallway spilled across his shoulders, casting a long, suffocating shadow that seemed to pin Riley to the floor. "You're wondering if I've already called the authorities," Dominic said, his voice a low, melodic vibration that cut through the stagnant air. He stepped into the room, the soft thud of his handmade shoes sounding like a gavel. "Or perhaps you're wondering which of my men will be the one to escort you to the basement." Riley forced herself to look up, meeting eyes that were as dark and unyielding as obsidian. "I'm an assistant, Dominic. I dropped my phone. It's a mistake, nothing more." Dominic let out a short, humorless breath that wasn't quite a laugh. He leaned against the edge of his mahogany desk, just inches from where she knelt. "A mistake is forgetting to schedule a meeting, Riley. A specialized subdermal comms unit with encryption protocols used only by the Secret Service. That is a confession." He reached down, not to strike her, but to tilt her chin up with a single gloved finger. The contact was terrifyingly gentle. "You were sent here to dismantle my life. To peel back the layers of my business until you found something to feed your masters. But here is the reality of your failure. The moment you stepped into this study, you ceased to be an agent. You became a ghost." Riley's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her gaze steady. "If you were going to kill me, you would have done it the moment I touched the desk." "Death is a mercy I haven't decided if you deserve," Dominic murmured, his eyes scanning her face with a terrifyingly clinical intensity. "You work for people who consider you a disposable asset, Riley. If I let you walk out that door, they will burn you to protect the mission. If you stay, you belong to me. You will feed them exactly what I tell you to, or I will ensure the world knows exactly who and what you are. That is the trap. You can be my puppet, or you can be a memory. Choose quickly." I find I have very little patience for broken things." The weight of the choice settled in the pit of Riley's stomach like lead. The agency would disavow her before the sun rose. She was no longer the hunter, she was the leverage. And as Dominic stared down at her, she realized with a sickening jolt that he wasn't just explaining her failure, he was enjoying it. The silence of the Vance estate was far from peaceful. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed against Riley's lungs. Stripped of her comms, her hidden firearm, and her identity, she felt more naked than if she had been physically bare. Dominic hadn't thrown her into a dungeon. Instead, he had imprisoned her in luxury, a gilded suite on the 3rd floor with silk sheets that felt like spider webs and windows that overlooked a perimeter she knew was rigged with pressure sensors and thermal cameras. Every morning, a silent maid would leave a tray of food that Riley barely touched, her training screaming at her that every bite was a potential sedative. She spent her hours packing the confines of the room, her mind a frantic map of exit strategies that all ended in a dead end. She was a ghost in a house of shadows, watching the world through the glass like a specimen in a jar. The house arrest was a psychological siege. Dominic didn't visit often, but when he didn't use force. He would simply stand in the doorway, his presence an immovable mountain of calm authority, and watch her. He saw her restlessness, her calculated glances at the vents, and her twitching fingers. He was waiting for her to break, to realize that the agency she was so desperate to return to hadn't sent a rescue team. They hadn't even sent a signal. "You're looking for a way out," Dominic remarked one evening, his voice cutting through the gloom of the twilight hour. He leaned against the doorframe, a glass of dark liquid in his hand. "But you should be looking for a way in. Your people have already deleted your file, Riley. To them, you died the moment you dropped that earpiece." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Riley didn't respond, her jaw set in a rigid line of defiance, but the cold realization began to seep into her bones. In the Secret Service, you were only as good as your last mission. In Dominic's house, she was a liability he was choosing to keep alive for reasons she couldn't yet fathom. As the moon rose, casting long, cage-like shadows across the expensive rug, Riley realized the terrifying truth. She wasn't just hiding from the devil, she was starting to depend on him for her very existence. The heavy, stifling silence of the Vance estate began to fracture not with a bang, but with the quiet murmur of voices coming from the West Wing. Riley moved through the corridors like a shadow, her footsteps silent on the hand-woven Persian rugs. According to her tactical map, this was the Red Zone, the private quarters where Dominic conducted his most sensitive business. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment to find the ledger, the link, the one piece of evidence that would redeem her catastrophic failure in the study. She pressed her back against the cold mahogany door of the library, her breath shallow. But instead of the harsh negotiations of a mafia boss, she heard the soft, rhythmic sound of a page turning and a child's inquisitive giggle. Peering through the slight crack in the door, Riley froze. Dominic wasn't surrounded by armed guards or piles of illicit cash. He was sitting in a worn leather armchair, a young boy, no older than 7, perched on the ottoman beside him. Spread out across the desk were blueprints, not for a smuggling route, but for a multi-level community center in one of the city's most neglected districts. "But why do we need the garden on the roof, Mr. Vance?" the boy asked, his eyes wide. "Because, Leo," Dominic's voice was lower, stripped of the serrated edge he used with Riley. "Some people spend their whole lives looking at concrete. Everyone deserves to see something grow." Dominic reached out, ruffling the boy's hair with a hand that Riley knew could snap a neck without hesitation. In that moment, the predator she had been briefed on disappeared. She watched him hand the boy an envelope, college tuition for a daughter of a fallen soldier in his organization, she realized, as she caught sight of the name on the ledger. This wasn't just business. It was an intense, quiet loyalty to the people the system had chewed up and spat out. Dominic wasn't just a boss. He was a foundation. Riley's grip on her concealed holster loosened. For the first time, the black-and-white world of the Secret Service felt dangerously gray. If this man was the monster her handlers described, why was he the only one building something meant to last? The first seed of doubt took root in her mind. more terrifying than any threat Dominic had ever made. She wasn't just watching a criminal. She was watching a man who cared for his people with a ferocity her own agency had never shown her. The silence of the Vance estate at 3 in the morning wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. Riley sat in the glowing hum of the basement server room, her fingers flying across a customized deck that shouldn't have existed. Dominic had given her the encryption keys, a gesture of trust that felt more like a challenge. He wanted her to see what she had been blind to for a decade. She bypassed the final firewall, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The screen flickered, and then the ghost appeared, a hidden partition within the Secret Service's secure cloud, masked by a series of recursive loops. It was a machine within the machine, a shadow database her superiors had never mentioned. As the files decrypted, Riley felt the world she had built her identity upon begin to dissolve. There were no mission briefings here, only ledgers. She saw names of senators, offshore accounts, and logistics for shipments that had nothing to do with national security. Then, she found the folder labeled Project V. Her breath hitched. Inside were photos of Dominic's sister, surveillance logs of his family's private movements, and a direct order for a controlled liquidation of the Vance assets, signed by her own mentor, Director Miller. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Dominic wasn't the monster she had been sent to slay. He was the witness they were trying to silence. Her agency wasn't protecting the country. They were protecting a profit margin, and she had been their most loyal weapon. A shadow shifted in the doorway. She didn't reach for her weapon. She didn't even turn around. She knew the scent of his cologne, the weight of his presence. "Now you know," Dominic said, his voice a low vibration in the small room. Riley looked at the screen, then at her own reflection in the glass, a woman wearing the face of a patriot but serving the hands of a traitor. The ghost was finally out of the machine, and as the cold blue light of the monitor washed over her, Riley knew there was no going back. She wasn't just an agent anymore. She was a liability to the people she once called family, and a partner to the man she was supposed to kill. The silk of the midnight blue gown felt less like high fashion and more like a second skin of armor as Riley Maddox stepped out of the sleek black sedan. Beside her, Dominic Vance offered his arm, his tuxedo tailored with a precision that mirrored the lethal sharpness of his gaze. Tonight, the grand ballroom was a minefield. This gala was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar, but for Riley, it was a gauntlet. Her former team, the very people she had trained with and bled beside, were stationed at every exit, their eyes scanning the crowd for the traitor they believed she had become. Dominic leaned in, his breath warm against her ear, the gesture appearing intimate to any observer but carrying a low, tactical warning. "Stay close, Riley. The director is here personally. He's looking for a reason to end this tonight." As they moved through the shimmering crowd, the air grew heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and hidden agendas. Riley caught the glint of a familiar silver tie across the room, Agent Miller, her former partner. He was standing near the champagne tower, his hand hovering near his jacket in a way that signaled he was carrying more than just a radio. She didn't look away. She couldn't. She had to play the role of the devoted companion, the woman who had traded her badge for the spoils of the underworld. The music was a sweeping orchestral piece that felt ironically tragic. Every time a Secret Service earpiece flashed under the chandeliers, Riley felt a spike of adrenaline she had to suppress with a practiced smile. Dominic navigated the social circles with the grace of a king among peasants, his hand firm on her waist, guiding her through the gaps in the agency's surveillance. "You're doing well," Dominic murmured as they reached the center of the floor for a mandatory dance. "But your heart is racing. Calm it. You aren't the prey anymore, Riley. You're the one holding the cards they don't even know exist." As he spun her, she locked eyes with the director, standing on the mezzanine. The man who had sent her in was now the man who wanted her erased. In that moment, the fear vanished, replaced by a cold, burning clarity. She wasn't dodging her team because she was afraid of them. She was dodging them because she was no longer one of them. She was something more dangerous now. She was a witness to the truth. The silence of the Vance estate was shattered not by a scream, but by the rhythmic, heavy thud of a body hitting mahogany. Riley's instincts, honed by a decade of federal training, reacted before her mind could even register the source of the noise. She crossed the room in 3 strides, finding Dominic slumped against his desk, his hand pressed tightly against his side. The dark fabric of his tailored suit was already slick with a deep, encroaching crimson that looked almost black under the dim study lights. "Dominic," she breathed, her voice a sharp contrast to the previous night's whispers. The perfect assistant was gone. In her place stood the operative. She didn't ask what happened. The shattered window and the distant screech of tires told the story. Dominic's breathing was shallow, his teeth gritted in a snarl of defiant pain. "Riley, get out. They'll come back to finish it." She ignored him, her hands moving with clinical precision. She tore away his silk shirt, revealing the jagged entry wound. The sight of his blood on her skin should have felt like a victory. This was the man she was sent to neutralize. But instead, it felt like a hole was being ripped through her own chest. Her training kicked in like a cold machine. She grabbed a clean linen cloth from a side table, applying rhythmic, agonizing pressure to the wound. "Look at me, Dominic. Stay with me," she commanded, her tone vibrating with a raw authority he hadn't heard before. She reached into her hidden tactical kit, pulling out a small vial of antiseptic and a suture needle she'd kept for herself. As she worked, her fingers dancing between the ink of his elaborate tattoos and the blood of his reality, the irony wasn't lost on her. She was using the skills the government gave her to save the very man they wanted dead. Every time he flinched, a jolt of electricity shot through her. She wasn't just sealing a wound, she was sealing her fate. With every stitch, she was sewing herself to him, weaving her life into the dark tapestry of his world. Dominic reached up, his blood-stained fingers brushing the edge of her jaw, his gaze searching hers with a dazed, newfound clarity. He saw the agent, the protector, and the woman all at once. In that moment, amidst the scent of copper and gunpowder, the mission didn't just fail, it died. Riley wasn't just an observer anymore. She was the only thing standing between the Mafia Boss and the grave, and she realized with terrifying certainty that she would kill anyone who tried to bridge that gap. The silence in the study was heavy, pressing against Riley's eardrums like the depth of the ocean. She remained on her knees, the cold marble seeping through her tactical gear, while Dominic Vance paced the perimeter of the room like a predator deciding whether to kill or play. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a king whose throne had been built on secrets. "You're thinking about the exit," Dominic said, his voice a low, melodic vibration that seemed to fill the hollow spaces in her chest. "You're calculating the distance to the window, the weight of the glass, the seconds it would take for my security to intercept you. But you're missing the most important variable, Agent Maddox." He stopped directly in front of her, his shadow stretching long and dark across her trembling frame. "Your own people have already scrubbed your file. To the Secret Service, you aren't a compromised asset. You're a liability they've already decided to liquidate." Riley finally looked up, her gaze meeting his scorched earth eyes. "You're lying. I've given 10 years to that agency." Dominic let out a short, humorless laugh and reached into his jacket, pulling out a tablet. He swiped a finger across the screen and held it out. It was a live feed of her apartment, or what was left of it. A cleaning crew in unmarked tactical gear was stripping the walls, erasing every trace of Riley Maddox's existence. "They don't want me because I'm a criminal, Riley. They want me because I have the ledger that proves your director has been laundering agency funds through my rivals for a decade. You were sent here to find that ledger, not to arrest me, but to ensure it, and anyone who had seen it, disappeared forever." The world Riley had built her identity upon tilted and cracked. The one mistake wasn't dropping her earpiece, it was trusting the wrong side of the law. "I have a proposal," Dominic murmured, kneeling so he was at eye level with her. The shift in power was subtle but profound. He wasn't looking down at her anymore, he was looking into her. "An unholy alliance, you stay. You use your clearance to bypass the encryption on their secondary server, and I'll give you the one thing you've never actually had." He leaned in closer, his breath warm against her cold skin. "The truth. About your agency, about the fire that took your parents, and about who really signed your recruitment papers. Help me burn their house down, Riley, and I'll help you build a new one." Riley looked at his outstretched hand. It was the hand of a man the world called a villain, offered by a man who had just saved her life from the heroes. Her fingers hovered over his, the line between duty and survival vanishing into the shadows of the room. She wasn't an agent anymore. She was a woman choosing her own side. "What's the first move?" she whispered, her voice hardening as she finally stood up, matching his height. Dominic's lips curved into a dark, satisfied smile. "First, we make them think you're dead. Then we show them how right they were to be afraid of you." The cold blue glow of the burner phone was the only light in the heavy darkness of Riley's room. It vibrated against the bedside table with a rhythmic, mechanical buzz that felt like a death knell. She didn't need to see the caller ID to know who it was. There was only one person who had this number, and only one reason he would be calling at 3 in the morning. "Maddox," the voice crackled on the other end, stripped of any warmth. It was Director Miller, the man who had handpicked her for the service, the man she had once viewed as a father figure. Now, his voice felt like a noose tightening around her neck. "You've been off the grid for 48 hours. The window is closing. If Vance isn't neutralized by dawn, we consider you a compromised asset." Riley gripped the phone until her knuckles turned white, her eyes darting toward the heavy oak door. Somewhere down the hall, Dominic was sleeping, the man who had spared her life when she gave him every reason to take it. "The intel is more complex than we thought, Director," she whispered, her voice a brittle shield. "Vance isn't the primary threat. I have evidence that." "I don't care about your evidence, Riley," Miller cut her off, his tone dropping into a lethal, quiet register. "I care about results. You were sent there to pull a trigger, not to play house with a criminal. You're standing in the crosshairs of a very large scope right now. Either you finish the job or we send a cleanup crew to finish both of you. You have 4 hours. Make them count." The line went dead. Riley sat on the edge of the bed, the silence of the estate suddenly feeling oppressive, like the air was being sucked out of the room. She reached into her tactical bag, her fingers brushing against the cold, familiar steel of her suppressed sidearm. This was what she was trained for. This was the black and white world she had mastered. But as she looked at the door, she didn't see a target. She saw the man who had looked at her shattered earpiece and seen a human being instead of a spy. She stood up, her movements mechanical, a ghost walking through a fortress of secrets. She reached the door to Dominic's study, the place where her one mistake had begun. The weight of the gun in her waistband felt like a mountain. She was frozen, not by fear of death, but by the paralyzing realization that to save herself, she had to destroy the only person who truly saw her. The dawn was coming, and with it, a choice that would either cement her as a hero of a lie or a traitor to the only truth she had ever found. The rain lashed against the reinforced glass of the remote mountain cabin, a rhythmic drumming that underscored the heavy silence inside. This was the safe house, a place that didn't exist on any government map, tucked away in the jagged peaks where the air was thin and secrets were buried deep. Inside, the only light came from the low, crackling fire in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows across the pine walls. Riley sat on the edge of a worn leather sofa, her hands wrapped around a glass of whiskey that she hadn't touched. The tactical jacket was gone, replaced by a simple gray sweater that made her look smaller, more human. Dominic stood by the fire, his back to her. He had shed his tailored blazer, and for the first time, Riley saw the physical toll of his life. Through the thin fabric of his dress shirt, the faint ridges of scar tissue were visible on his shoulder, jagged reminders of a past he usually kept hidden behind a wall of cold authority. He turned, catching her gaze, and for once the predatory sharpness in his eyes was replaced by something weary. He didn't offer a platitude. Instead, he sat in the armchair opposite her and began to unbutton his cuff. "They tell you in the service that scars are just lessons you survived," Riley murmured, her voice barely audible over the wind. She pulled back her sleeve, revealing a thin, silver line that ran from her wrist to her elbow, a souvenir from a botched extraction in Istanbul. "But they don't tell you that some lessons never stop hurting." Dominic looked at the mark, then met her eyes. "My father gave me my first one," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Not out of hate, but to make sure I was hard enough to inherit a throne I never wanted. You were trained to protect a system, Riley. I was trained to be a shield for a family that's now mostly in the ground. We're the same, different uniforms, same ghosts. In the flickering light, the distance between them, the badge, the crime, the betrayal, seemed to dissolve. Riley found herself speaking of the orphanage, the cold discipline of the academy, and the crushing weight of trying to be perfect for a world that didn't care about her. Dominic spoke of a sister he couldn't save and the burden of a name that acted as a cage. There was no tactical advantage to be gained here, no mission to complete. It was a night of raw, unfiltered truth, where the agent and the boss were stripped away, leaving only two broken people trying to find a reason to keep fighting. As the fire died down to embers, the silence was no longer oppressive. It was a sanctuary. For the first time in her life, Riley wasn't watching for an exit. She was exactly where she chose to be. The silence of the Vance estate didn't break. It shattered. One moment, the moonlight was reflecting off the polished marble of the grand foyer. The next, the air was filled with the rhythmic thud of flash bangs and the mechanical shriek of breaching charges. Smoke, thick, gray, and tasting of sulfur, swallowed the hallway in an instant. Riley was out of bed before the first window broke, her muscle memory overriding her racing heart. She reached for the sidearm tucked into her bedside drawer, her fingers closing around the cold grip with a familiarity that felt like a curse. In the hallway, the world was a strobe light of tactical torches. Black-clad figures moved with surgical precision, men she had trained with, men whose children's names she knew. Her agency had come to extract her, but the way they moved through the house, weapons hot, told her they weren't here for a rescue. They were here for a clean sweep. She found Dominic at the top of the grand staircase. He wasn't hiding. He stood like a sentinel, a heavy caliber pistol in his hand, his eyes scanning the smoke for the telltale glint of NVG goggles. When he saw Riley emerge from the shadows with a weapon, his jaw tightened. For a fraction of a second, the old suspicion flickered in his gaze, the fear that this was the moment she would fulfill her original mission and put a bullet in his back. "Riley," he barked over the sound of breaking glass below. "The service entrance. Go, now." He was trying to save her, even now, from the bloodbath he knew was coming. But as the first red laser dot danced across Dominic's chest, Riley didn't turn toward the exit. She didn't think about her career, her pension, or the badge she had already emotionally discarded. She thought about the one mistake that had led her here, the mistake that had finally allowed her to see clearly. She pivoted, her weapon tracking the movement in the shadows of the lower balcony. "Contact front," a voice yelled, a voice she recognized as her former partner, Miller. "Maddox, what are you doing? Stand down." Riley didn't stand down. She squeezed the trigger, the recoil jarring her arm as she suppressed the team advancing on Dominic's flank. She wasn't an agent anymore. She was a shield. The choice was final, echoing louder than the gunfire. By firing on her own, she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She had chosen the monster who had shown her the truth over the heroes who had fed her lies. As she and Dominic retreated into the reinforced safety of the study, the hunter and the captive were gone. In their place stood two survivors, bonded by a betrayal that had turned into the only loyalty that mattered. The sleek black sedan tore through the mountain pass, its headlights cutting jagged paths through the swirling midnight fog. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of rain, gunpowder, and the heavy realization that there was no turning back. Riley Maddox gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, her eyes darting constantly to the rearview mirror. For the first time in 10 years, she wasn't tracking a target, she was the target. Beside her, Dominic Vance sat in a state of unnatural stillness, his tailored suit jacket discarded to reveal a tactical vest that looked far too comfortable on his frame. He was bleeding from a shallow graze on his shoulder, but his focus remained entirely on the encrypted tablet in his lap. He didn't look like a mob boss in retreat. He looked like a general preparing for the next move. "They've bypassed the primary firewall," Dominic said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the small space of the car. "The agency is using your own clearance codes to track the vehicle's GPS. They aren't just coming for me, Riley. They're coming to erase the witness who knows too much." Riley didn't flinch. She took a sharp corner, the tires screaming against the wet asphalt as they veered onto a dirt logging road. Then let them come. I didn't burn my life down just to be a casualty in a cover-up. She looked at him then, a fleeting glance that held more weight than any confession. She had been trained to see men like Dominic as the enemy, as monsters to be caged. But as they hurtled through the darkness, she realized the true monsters were the ones who had handed her a badge and told her it was a shield for the innocent. Dominic reached out, his hand covering hers on the gear shift. His touch was warm, a grounding force against the icy adrenaline flooding her veins. "We have 3 hours until sunrise," Dominic murmured, his gaze locking onto hers. "By then, the border will be locked down. We aren't just running anymore, Riley. We're going rogue. Are you ready to be the ghost they're afraid of?" Riley tightened her grip and pushed the accelerator to the floor. The engine roared, a defiant scream against the encroaching shadows. She was no longer an agent of the state. She was a partner in a dangerous, beautiful rebellion. "I've been a ghost my whole life, Dominic. It's time I started haunting them back." The car disappeared into the dense tree line, leaving nothing behind but the fatting scent of burnt rubber and the silence of a bridge that had been burned forever. The blue light of the laptop screen felt like a physical weight against Riley's tired eyes, casting her face in a ghostly, clinical pallor. They were in a safe house tucked away in the jagged cliffs of the coastline, the sound of the crashing tide below mimicking the roar of blood in her ears. Dominic stood by the door, a silent sentinel, giving her the space to confront the monster she had unknowingly served for a decade. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling as she bypassed the final layer of encryption, a code she had helped design. With a final, hollow click, the ghost file opened. It wasn't just a list of names. It was a ledger of lives traded for political capital. Riley's breath hitched as she scrolled through the data. She saw the blueprints for the very conspiracy she had been told Dominic Vance was leading. But the signatures at the bottom of the authorization forms weren't mafia aliases. They were the digital fingerprints of her own director. She saw the Gianna Project, a tactical operation that had authorized the fire at the Castellana warehouse years ago, an event they had blamed on a rival gang to destabilize the region. It hadn't been a mob war. It had been a government-sanctioned execution. The faces of the collateral damage flashed across the screen: innocent families, children, and a younger, less scarred version of the man now standing behind her. "They didn't send me to stop a criminal," Riley whispered, her voice cracking like dry glass. "They sent me to silence a witness." She looked at the screen and saw her own name listed in the mission parameters. She was never supposed to return. She was the disposable asset, chosen specifically because she had no family to ask questions when she eventually disappeared alongside her target. The badge she had once worn with such pride now felt like a brand of shame. Dominic moved closer, his hand settling on her shoulder. He didn't say, "I told you so." He simply watched as the world Riley believed in crumbled into digital dust. The truth didn't just hurt, it burned. It incinerated the woman who believed in black and white, leaving behind someone who realized that the only thing real in this room was the man she had been ordered to kill. "I spent my life fighting for them," she said, her eyes finally meeting Dominic's in the reflection of the dark window. "And all this time, I was the one holding the gun for the real villains." The realization was a cold, sharp blade. Riley Maddox, the perfect agent, was gone. In her place was a woman who finally understood that in a world of monsters, the most dangerous ones were the ones wearing the uniforms. The safe house was tucked away in the jagged cliffs of the Amalfi Coast, a place where the salt spray usually masked the scent of gunpowder and paranoia. For the first time in weeks, Riley felt the tension in her shoulders start to fray. She watched Dominic through the cracked doorway of the kitchen. He was pouring 2 glasses of wine, his movements devoid of the predatory edge he usually carried. They were no longer agent and target. They were simply 2 people clinging to a life that shouldn't exist. The silence was shattered not by a gunshot, but by the soft, rhythmic vibration of a phone on a mahogany table. It was Riley's encrypted line, nor was it Dominic's burner. It belonged to Marco, Dominic's younger cousin, the man who had grown up in Dominic's shadow and had been the one to secure this final refuge. Riley's tactical instincts, dormant for only a few hours, screamed to life. She moved toward the hallway just as Marco stepped out onto the balcony, his back to the room. He was speaking in a hushed, jagged whisper that the wind tried to steal, but Riley's training made her an expert in the language of traitors. "They're here," Marco hissed into the receiver. "The north perimeter is weak. Just make sure the director knows I was the one who gave him Vance. And the girl, do whatever you want with her." Riley felt the cold drain from the room, replaced by a searing, white-hot clarity. She didn't look for her badge. She looked for the weight of the Beretta she had hidden in the waistband of her jeans. She stepped back into the kitchen, her eyes meeting Dominic's. He had seen it too. The way the light from the balcony caught the edge of Marco's face, the way his cousin wouldn't meet his gaze through the glass. Dominic's expression didn't crumble. It hardened into a mask of ancient, obsidian grief. This was the one thing he feared more than the Secret Service, the rot from within. Family wasn't just blood, he had told her, but blood was the only thing that could truly stain the floor. "Marco," Dominic said, his voice a low, vibrating hum that seemed to rattle the window panes. The younger man froze, the phone slipping from his fingers and clattering against the stone floor. Outside, the sound of heavy rotors began to drown out the crashing waves below. Black-clad figures began to descend from the darkness, fast-roping onto the terrace. Riley raised her weapon, her body shielding Dominic's side. The Secret Service hadn't found them through a satellite or a wiretap. They had been invited in by the one person Dominic had trusted to keep the gate. The one mistake hadn't been Riley, after all. It was the belief that loyalty could be bought with anything other than blood. The sleek, matte black Humvee killed its headlights 3 miles out, gliding through the midnight fog like a predator in its natural habitat. Riley sat in the backseat, her fingers methodically checking the seal on her tactical vest. Beside her, Dominic was a statue of tailored shadows, his presence providing a strange, grounding heat against the biting chill of the cabin. For years, Riley had walked through the front doors of the agency HQ as a golden girl, a decorated shadow. Tonight, she was coming back as the storm. "You're quiet," Dominic murmured, his voice barely audible over the low hum of the tires. "Just calculating," Riley replied, though her heart hammered a different rhythm. "The perimeter has a thermal sweep every 60 seconds. The biometric locks at the sublevel are coded to my old clearance, but they'll trigger a silent alarm the moment I scan." Dominic reached over, his gloved hand covering hers. It wasn't a gesture of protection, but of partnership. "Then we don't use your clearance, we use the chaos." The plan was a suicide mission by any standard definition, but as the concrete monolith of the agency headquarters loomed out of the darkness, Riley felt a cold, familiar clarity wash over her. This was the final countdown. Every bridge she had ever built was already behind her, smoldering in the rearview mirror. They breached the service entrance with surgical precision. Dominic's men moved like smoke, neutralizing the exterior sensors while Riley bypassed the mainframe from a junction box in the loading bay. Her hands didn't shake. The one mistake that had landed her at Dominic's feet had been her undoing. Tonight, her precision would be her redemption. As they moved through the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors of the sub-basement, the air tasted of ozone and filtered oxygen. This was the belly of the beast, the place where her life had been scripted by men in high-backed chairs. Every step closer to the director's office was a step further from the woman she used to be. 10 minutes until the backup generators kick in, Riley whispered into her comms, her eyes tracking the red laser grids dancing across the floor. Dominic moved at her shoulder, his suppressed weapon raised. He looked at her, and for a split second, the cold professionalism of the mission slipped. In his eyes, she wasn't an asset or an agent. She was the woman who had seen his soul and stayed. "Let's end it," he said. The elevator dings were the only warning. As the doors slid open to the executive level, the silent alarm Riley had been waiting for finally began to pulse, a rhythmic crimson heartbeat that signaled the beginning of the end. The hunt was over. The war had officially begun. The sterile white walls of the agency's black site headquarters were a stark contrast to the crimson blooming across Riley's tactical vest. Every breath felt like inhaling broken glass, but she didn't slow down. Beside her, Dominic moved with a lethal, rhythmic grace, his tailored suit jacket discarded, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms splattered with the evidence of their desperate ascent. They weren't agent and target anymore. They were two halves of a single, jagged blade cutting through the heart of a conspiracy. In the center of the command hub, Director Miller stood behind a wall of reinforced glass, his face twisted in the smug disbelief of a man who thought he was untouchable. "You're throwing it all away, Maddox," his voice boomed over the intercom. "The years of training, the honors, your entire identity. You're dying for a criminal." Riley stopped, her gaze leveling on the man who had been her mentor, the man who had sent her into a trap he never intended her to survive. She looked at the Secret Service badge clipped to her waist, the cold metal that had defined her worth for a decade. With a hand that no longer trembled, she unclipped it. "The agent died the moment you sold out your own people, Miller," she said, her voice echoing with a terrifying, hollow clarity. "I'm just the one delivering the eulogy." The glass shattered in a synchronized explosion of sparks and lead. Dominic moved first, a blur of shadow drawing fire, while Riley flanked left, her movements no longer governed by a manual, but by an instinct born of survival and something far more dangerous: loyalty. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and copper. As the final guards fell, Miller reached for a backup sidearm, but he was too slow. Riley's foot pinned his wrist to the floor. She looked down at him, not with the cold detachment of a federal officer, but with the searing intensity of a woman who had reclaimed her soul. She didn't pull the trigger for the government. She pulled it to silence the lies. When the smoke finally cleared, the silence that followed was deafening. Dominic stepped through the wreckage, his breathing heavy, reaching out to catch Riley as her knees finally gave way. He didn't check for her badge, he checked for her pulse. In the ruins of her old life, the perfect agent was gone, buried under the debris of the agency's greed. As Dominic pulled her into the safety of his arms, Riley let the last of her aliases slip away. The mission was over. The partnership, the real one, had just begun. One mistake changed everything for Riley Maddox, but it also opened her eyes to a world where the heroes wear masks and the villains hold the truth. If you were gripped by Riley and Dominic's high-stakes journey from enemies to allies, make sure to subscribe and join our community of thriller lovers. Did Riley make the right choice by burning her badge? Or was Dominic just a master manipulator? We want to hear your theories. Comment below with your thoughts on that final twist, and if you enjoyed this cinematic experience, hit the like button and share this story with anyone who loves a dark, high-stakes romance. Don't forget to turn on post notifications so you never miss the next chapter of our deep dive stories. Thank you for watching, and remember, in this game, the person you're sent to take down might be the only one who can save you.